Hey, my friend, it's Julie Clough here, your life and grief coach. Welcome to the Build a Life After Loss podcast. I'm thrilled to bring you uplifting grief support and hope for rebuilding your life one small step at a time. Let's get started. Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 126, Making Space for Grief, an interview with Emily. I have a former client on today for an interview. We worked together earlier last year, and Emily is just a beautiful person. And like all my wonderful clients that I feel so honored to work with, I am super excited to introduce you to Emily today. Emily was kind enough to share her grief journey and how her grief has opened her eyes to grief in lots of areas of life and given her more compassion for the people around her, and how she looks at grief now and the importance of giving grief space in our life. We're going to jump right into the interview. I am so thrilled to see my friend Emily. You can't see her, but I can see her. She is a former client that we got to work together for a few weeks, and it was amazing. And she's amazing. And hi, Emily. Welcome.
Hi. Good to see you.
Good to see you. We were like fangirling each other when we got on because we haven't seen each other for a little while. But Emily is, like I said, a former client, and she agreed to do an interview today to share some of her experiences with everyone, which I'm so grateful for. I'm so grateful for your willingness to do that. So, Emily, why don't you just start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your story?
So my name's Emily. I live in a small town in Montana, and I guess it's been a year and a half now. My father, who I was very close to, had a fall and wound up in the hospital, and over the period of a few months, died basically. And he was in New York, and I traveled back and forth quite a bit. I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. I've got two small kids and a very supportive husband who was able to manage them while I was, dealing with the logistics of this. And then after he died and I came back to sort of the new normal of my life, I was struggling, and I remembered that this friend of mine had once mentioned this amazing grief counselor she worked with. And this was a friend in town who had an experience that caused her to want to talk to a grief counselor. And at the time, my dad was fine. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting, sort of shelve that little piece of information away in my head somewhere in case I ever need it. And so I reached out to her and I, shared what had happened. And I said, I'd love to get in touch with this person and this person was you, because she had such amazing things to say about you. And that is how I came to work with you. You were sort of given to me by this person many, many months before I needed you. And there you were.
Yeah, that's so cool. And just to clarify, just for logistics reasons, when people call me a grief counselor, sometimes people get the idea that I'm a therapist, but I'm not.
Oh, sure.
I'm a grief coach. So just to clarify,
coach.
But yeah, like what a beautiful thing that she shared that with you. And it's just like, I love things like that because like shows us how the universe is really out there to support us.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a nice reminder to, that we give people gifts. We don't always realize the gifts we're giving. And, just by sharing things that have touched us, and been meaningful for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So take us back a little bit. What was it like in those weeks, couple months before you reached out to me? What did things look like? What prompted you to feel like extra support would be great?
I can't really remember. I mean, I can't remember the exact sort of day-to-day stuff, but I think what happened is because he was in the hospital and he was sort of making this slow fading journey towards death, I was in a way very fortunate that I could do some of my grieving then. He was very lucid. His body was just failing him in all different ways. But, I was able to be there. I was able to talk to him. I was able to find a lot of closure, a lot of processing, the stuff that other people get sort of stolen away from them when someone dies quickly or unexpectedly. So I felt lucky to have all that. And I felt like I had been grieving for several months when it was clear that he was dying. So I think there was a part of me that felt like, okay, he's finally passed. It's in a way a relief, but I should be fine. I should be able to get on with my life now, but I hadn't, I think part of the grieving had been the logistical part of the grieving, the talking about stuff, the organizing things, the, parting words, and there was all this other stuff left in me that I didn't really know how to manage. And I was, working, being a wife and a mother and just kind of spread really thin and not able to make space for working on my grief. Partly just because it's hard to prioritize our own selves sometimes in the midst of family life, but also because I just didn't really know how to do that and how to ask for it. And even if I did ask for it, what was I going to do with that time on my own, just sitting with my grief? It didn't feel productive or like I would feel like I was just sort of like spinning.
Yeah. Spinning is a great way to describe it, isn't it? It's just like, where do I go from here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I remember when we first met, like it was, your grief felt pretty overwhelming because it was pretty fresh.
It was. And, we were very close, it wasn't just sort of like an old family member dies and it's a bummer, it was like, he was sort of my person and I was his person, in this world. And so I think it was hard because it was like, when someone dies and they've occupied that's multiple roles in your life, so it was like I lost my dad, but also my friend and also my, person I talked about writing with and person that I, who I laughed with, like when you lose someone who plays a lot of different roles in your life, it's almost like the grieving is like exponential because you've lost like 5 people at once in a way,
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I loved is I got to know your dad while I was working with you. And I got to know him and love him because you loved him so much.
Yeah.
Love him so much. Yeah. Yeah. So share a little bit about like what that was like working with me, what that looked like for you, how that was.
Well, one of the things that was so nice about it was having it on my calendar, even if that week I was feeling, oh God, I got to make time for that, that I think for so many of us, for women in particular, I think we have a hard time prioritizing ourselves and self-care or whatever you call it. And somehow having it on the calendar, having the family know, okay, this is when, I've got my meeting, I'll be up in the office with the door closed, and just, almost like publicly declaring to the household, I'm doing my work. My work of grieving is happening on, Tuesday at 2:00 or whatever. And that somehow being accountable to you, having you on the calendar, just rather than having it be up to my own timeline and my own motivation. And, I could see myself having like a stack of grief books next to my bedside table and never doing anything about it, but having like a partner in it. And that's where you felt like a partner. You felt like a loving, supportive partner who had more information than I did. And I think that's kind of just who you want holding your hand through this stuff, because your friends and your family members can be comforting, and and some of them have been through what you've been through, and they can know what it is to lose a dad or lose the particular person you lost. But having someone who's kind of expert in it and can tell you, hey, this is going to get easier. This is going to get better. And I felt confident when you told me that. And a million other people could tell me that all day long, but something about you knew, you had firsthand experience, you had the experience of all your clients. And I felt I trusted you to hold my hand and walk me down this path, knowing that at the end of it was something that was going to feel better.
Yeah. And what's really, and this is an experience that a lot of people have, but what's really interesting about your experience is that you lived in an area and your dad lived far, far away. So it's not like you lived around people that knew your dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Except for your immediate family, of course, your immediate family knew your dad, but it wasn't like you were living in the same town or that other people were as aware of how impactful the loss was. And I find this so often with, especially like you said, like with women, where they experience a loss of a sibling or a parent, or a loss that's not public. And then they just go right back into regular life.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have like you said, they don't have a place to express their grief in order to move through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you almost feel like you have this sort of window of time when you're allowed to walk around with a big sad face and start crying if anyone asks you how you're doing. And, I felt like there was a moment like that where everyone in town kind of knew why I was out of town quite a bit, why suddenly Nathan was home with the boys, and why I was sort of missing from my usual things. And in a small town, word does get around, but I do think there comes a time with everyone where after a few weeks or certainly a few months, you feel like, oh, I'm not allowed to be doing this anymore. I'm not allowed to be shirking all my normal responsibilities and not taking showers and, anything else like that. And you almost wish you could just have like a little sign on you that said, I lost someone close to me. I'm still grieving. Ask me about him, but yeah. So having, embarking on a project with you, and I think even just investing money in the process makes a difference in how we, especially as women, give ourselves permission to do the work. That if it's, we've paid for it, we've marked out the time in the calendar and negotiated childcare duties with our partner, we've invested. And so we're going to take it seriously. And it's unfortunate that it has to be like that, but I think that is just sort of what contemporary American working mom culture looks like.
Yeah. And investing in ourselves is so important on so many levels. Like you mentioned, it's not just the money, but it's the time and the arrangements and so forth, making that space.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you feel like? Share with us just like a handful or, couple things that you felt like were pivotal moments for you, or pivotal understandings that you got.
Well, I mean, there are a handful of different things that stick out. There was one thing, and this may have been during a webinar that you offered, but there was this graphic that you showed us of grief being like this huge weight that you're carrying, and it fills your entire body, and how over time it gets smaller and you're still holding it, but it's like you're not holding a boulder, you're holding like a stone or a little rock, and that idea that like you'll always be carrying it with you. This will always be with you, but it's not going to be with you to the degree that it's so encumbering and such a burden that prevents you from moving on, through your day, through your life. And that visual really stuck in my head. And then just other little things. Like you told me once about, someone who had, every time they saw a butterfly, they sort of said hi to their mom, and I have that with certain birds with my dad, where I sort of imagine like, oh, there he is, and, just little tricks. And I think different things will resonate for different people or make sense to different people, partly just depending on, I don't know, your faith background or how your brain works or, whatever. But for me, there were just a handful of little takeaways like that were just little tools that I could tuck in my pocket, that there was the long-term big picture healing. And then there was the little healing along the way, the little sort of, little moments. And that was helpful. I can't remember. I mean, I could look through my notebooks and I'm sure I have like pages of furiously scribbled notes, because there was always something that you gave me that then that week it was like a revelation that I could use this little tool to feel okay. But then you also, gave me permission to not feel okay, and you let me know like, this is not, and so I'm still not surprised when I get blindsided by, just a little thing that happens, like something where that person's missing, where their absence is felt acutely. I used to call my dad when I was walking home from having walked the boys to school in the morning. I'd call him, and I don't know what to do with that time now, and I think of him. And so I think there are those moments, those unexpected times when you're just the small stone becomes huge like a boulder again. But maybe the trick is that like it doesn't stay big as long. It doesn't stay big for as long. It's a boulder for a second and you're crying and you're just a mess. And then 5 minutes later, you've shrunk it down to a manageable pebble, tucked it in your pocket, and you continue walking on. So yeah, so the idea that like, you're not going to be 100% like fixed from this thing or cured or, it's a process and a practice, and it's probably a lifelong thing.
Well, and I, speak to the idea of like how that, I mean, I'm just listening to the way you describe that. And I'm thinking it's miraculous, because so often when we have those experiences where we get blindsided by something, when we don't understand our grief, we don't understand grief process, we don't have tools, then we heap so much guilt and shame and other emotions onto it and just create a bigger storm. Like it feels even weightier because we don't have the expectation that this isn't going to last, for the next month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think another thing that I really got out of working with you is, like you said, you live somewhere you move somewhere as an adult. No one here had met my dad, or even really some close friends knew how close I was with him. But, nobody knew the person. And so they're this abstract idea of a father who died, an old father who died thousands of miles away. They don't know who he was. And for you to say that you felt like you knew him, that you took the time to find out who he was. And I really use that. I feel like now I have this research, like I know how to be now for the people in my life who are grieving. And you gave me that, and I took a walk with a friend who just lost her father. And I just asked her about him the whole time. I just asked her, like, just let her talk about him. And I think she's going through the same thing of feeling like, you lost a parent out in California that no one in her town here knew. And now she's back and she's expected to be back in the swing of work and parenting and all that. And, I think just that gift of asking someone, to tell you about the person is a huge thing. And I think that's going to be a constant. I mean, there's COVID, but I'm just at the age at which people are starting to lose their parents. And so, I feel like I'm by no means expert at this, but I feel like I have a few more tools than I did before for how to handle it when a friend is grieving, and I don't need to feel scared of it or like I can't ask about it or I'm not sure how to ask about it. That sometimes just asking about the person.
That's beautiful. What I find this often happens is as I work with people, we not only go through the grief stuff, but we handle whatever's coming up during the week.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a few interesting things that happened while we were working together. One was COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But what other areas do you feel like, for example, one area that I find so many people often will mention is that this work really helped them with their close relationships too. Did you find that, or in what ways did you?
Yeah. So what I found really interesting was there was a definition of grief in the book that we were reading together. And I don't remember what it was, but it had to do with like an acknowledgement that like things are different now and they are not going back to the way they were. It was something that was very broad and very inclusive. And it wasn't just about sadness. It was more about like grief is like coming up against sort of irreversible change and figuring out how to, and I think I just expanding that definition of grief has helped me to have this much more empathetic view of the people in my life and to understand that almost everyone's grieving something at some point, and that the specifics can be different, but just being aware of these grief journeys going on all around me for things big and small, for things recent and old, and having more sensitivity towards that in other people and more empathy.
Mm.
That people are sometimes really struggling and acting out because of something that's happened that they can't change, they can't fix, they can't go back to, and how frustrating that is to people, and how sometimes that shows up as anger or other kinds of sort of unpleasant behavior. But yeah, just that expanding that understanding of grief and grieving and loss, and that it wasn't just about death or losing people.
Yeah. Do you remember, and I know it's been a little while, but do you recall feeling like the work that we did helped you with your confidence?
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, if you had asked me these questions like the month after we finished, I'd probably have better answers. I can't remember exactly why or how, but I feel like you definitely helped me move back into the world. And to have this thing that had just sort of became a part of me and made me stronger or wiser or something, and not quite so broken.
So what does life look like for you now?
I mean, one thing that's sort of new and different is that I quit the job that I'd been working for the past few years. And it was a good thing. And I was so happy I did it, but it was one of those unexpected triggers of sadness where I thought, oh God, this is what I would have talked to my dad about this. I would have talked through the decision making with him. I would have talked to, let him know as soon as it had happened. And so realizing, oh, right there, that was one of the other roles that he played, was sort of the thoughtful listener of big life decisions, and it's rare to have someone who will just sort of let you process your decision making and not jump in with advice or, so I missed him. And then I realized after a few weeks of sort of not quite knowing what to do next and not being great, not making the adjustment gracefully to being like the person who's home a lot in charge of house things and all that, I realized I'm grieving in a way, going back to that expanded definition of grief. I'm grieving this sort of loss of identity of, I was this person who clocked in at 8 and then clocked out at 4 and worked my job all day long on my computer. And not that it necessarily gave me a good sense of who I was. I wasn't like intimately connected with my career identity at that job, but it gave structure to my day. I didn't have to think for myself in a way. I could just kind of go on autopilot and do my job. And so I thought, oh, I'm sort of grieving the loss of that structure. And that's making me irritable. And that's making me kind of crabby with people around the house, and so recognizing just it's so valuable to me to realize how many experiences in life can be framed as grief experiences, and that the tools of sort of moving through grief can be applied to those experiences.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree. When my grief had finally stacked up with enough events, especially once my kids died, the grief was so overwhelming that I had to do something about it. It actually opened my eyes to all the other experiences that I had had that I had never really worked through or didn't have tools or didn't understand, how to work through those. And so once you understand that, once you have that tool, once you have that like toolbox, whatever you want to call it, of things that you can pull from at any time, it's a lifetime skill that you gain. Yeah. A lot of times people will tell me, I'm just worried if I just don't want to bring up all that emotion. I just don't want to like unleash it. What would you say to somebody that's feeling like, I just don't know if I want to do this work?
I think it's so personal. I mean, I think if someone came to me and said, hey, how did you move through this? Like, what do you recommend? I would absolutely then tell them what to do.
Did you find that, almost everybody I work with kind of they have a preconceived idea of what it's going to look like. And there's a little bit of hesitancy. Did you find it was scary working with me? Or, did you find that it was like more gentle than you expected, or, not
It
as
was,
scary as what you thought it might be?
yeah, I think it probably was less scary. And I don't know if that's because you just made me feel safe. So I also think because so often, it almost was like we were doing sort of parallel work, like working on the grief stuff around my dad, but then also working on the life stuff day to day, where the grief was manifesting in challenges just in my home or with my kids or with my husband. And so it felt very balanced. It didn't feel like it was just this one little part of my brain that we were just working on the rehashing of the death and the sad, it wasn't that. It was sort of like that was the stage on which my life was playing out at that time. And so we looked at everything, and I suspect there were sessions where I didn't cry. Maybe, I don't know. There were probably some where I cried a lot and then some where I didn't. And then there were the scary parts I did put off doing. Like there was some written work that you had wanted me to do, and I would put it off because I'm a procrastinator. And sorry about that. And it felt scary. That's what it was more than anything else. I thought, oh God, I can't open this. I can't crack open this part of my heart, or it's going to be too much. And you very lovingly but firmly encouraged me to do it. You just found a way to somehow let me know, hey, I expect you to do this, and that's where that coaching was, you had just a really perfect way of making me feel like you didn't give me too much leeway. You weren't like, oh, well, if you want to do it, do it. If not, you let me know, like, I expect you to do this. The good work comes from doing this, and you're going to be glad you did it, and so you nudged me in that direction. And then it was not scary once I did it. Every time I sat, and I would say to you, oh, I sat down and it didn't even take me as long as I thought it would. And it wasn't as hard. And you said, yeah, I know, So it was a combination of like the content of what we talked about wasn't as scary as I thought it would be, but also your style and your approach. You just walk that really nice line between sort of loving and gentle, but also firm isn't the right word, but you had clear expectations and you wanted me to meet them, and I think that you did that well.
Well, I believe in you. I believe in the people that I work in. I know this works. And so it's just like, I don't ever want you or anybody else to shortchange themselves but it's always a choice, right? Because this is an action program. It's a choose in situation.
Well, and another reason I think that working with you is so effective is because it has this kind of time limited approach. You're not saying, sign on with me to work through your grief stuff, and then we'll let you free when we're done. And I think that's a lot of people's fear with therapy or coaching or counseling, is that they're entering into a financial arrangement with no end. And they feel like, oh, well, how am I ever going to get done with this? But I think for you to be like, no, we can do this in 12 sessions, or we can do this in 8, whatever it was, like that's really comforting for it to have a time limit,
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think you work hard when you know that, you work harder because you only have a finite number of sessions to do the work.
That's probably true. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I mean, I guess just remembering that everyone around you is probably grieving something at any moment. And so when you have a cashier who's short with you, or someone who is behaving poorly, I think it's always important to consider what else might be going on with them that you don't know, and it certainly has made me more sensitive to that, and with COVID, it's made that sort of obvious, like tons of people are dealing with this stuff now, but, just to be aware that life is change, and change is hard and messy, and people who are suddenly behaving in a way that isn't ideal for you, maybe dealing with, grieving some life change, and just, I don't know, be gentle with them, or be gentle with yourself, and don't take everything personally and assume it has to do with you.
Yeah. I love that. A little self-compassion, a little compassion for those around you. Beautiful. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for sharing your experience and sharing your story.
Yeah.
It's just always a delight to talk to you.
It
And
was lovely.
and I love words. I love reading. I love words. And when I listen to you speak, it's like so eloquent. I just you're a writer, so you have just this elegant, intelligent way of speaking and expressing yourself, which I really appreciate also. So
Thanks.
yeah, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for being here today. I am super excited about some upcoming projects and resources that we're working on for you. And you definitely want to make sure that you're on our list. So go to buildalifeafterloss.com so that you'll get notified as soon as we have an announcement to share. You don't want to miss it. You really, really don't want to miss it. There's going to be some introductory offers coming up. Anyway, just trust me. Go get on the list. Please subscribe and rate and review. That would be such a blessing. And who do you know who needs to be here for some uplifting support? Be sure and share this episode. Your friends will thank you. Have a fabulous week. Remember, I believe in you. Love you. Bye.